Okay.
Why don't you drive faster? You're driving 25 miles an hour.
Talking about the second cardinal virtue. Okay, what's the definition of a virtue? Quick, rapid fire.
Habitual, firm disposition of to do good.
Habitual and firm disposition to act well, to do good. Okay? And a virtue stands halfway between what and what? No. Power and it's
Conscious.
nope.
Oh.
Virtue stands halfway between
And
the
vice.
power and its
Right.
no.
Oh, that's odd.
Power and act. Right? So every power is exercised by its own proper action. Each action is defined by its object. And the virtue is a firm and stable disposition to act well. So it is it's a way of shaping the power, standing halfway in between, if you will, between the power and its action, so that that power is firmly and stably disposed to act well with regard to its proper object. That's a virtue. Okay? So, based upon the four fundamental powers of the soul and the sentient part of our body, sentient knowledge, what are the four powers or appetites?
Concupiscible.
Okay.
Irascible.
Irascible, and those are those spiritual or sentient?
Sentient.
They're sentient, right? They're in our emotions. They're in our passions. Okay.
Intellect and
The
will.
is the will sentient or spiritual?
Spiritual.
Spiritual. And the intellect, is that spiritual?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got two spiritual powers and two material or sentient powers. Intellect's power is exercised in the act of
Prudence.
that's the
Virtue.
that's the virtue. Primary virtue. That's the cardinal virtue, which then perfects the act of knowing with the
True.
object of
True.
no. Yes, but what's the particular kind of truth that prudence perfects? Right reason about things to be done, right? So if you look at the definition of prudence, it's right reason about things to be done. So it's the perfection of knowing what to do and how to do it. Are you seeing how this works?
What are
So the broad category of truth, right, is further specified by the particular kind of truth, which we would call a truth of practical reason. What ought I do to know the truth about that and to know how to get it done? That's the virtue of prudence's job, to facilitate acting, doing that thinking process well all the time. Make sense?
Wait, what are these for?
Powers.
These are the two spiritual powers. These are the sentient powers or appetites.
Powers or appetite?
Yeah, I'm using those words synonymously, or because we would call them sentient appetites. You could call the will an appetite, but the intellect's not really an appetite, it's a power. But they're the four fundamental building blocks of our freedom, if you will, of our volitional life. Okay. Justice, on the other hand, is tied to the will. And justice perfects the act of doing, if you will, willing. With respect, and what are you supposed to will in general?
The good.
So justice in particular is willing the good with regard to the other. God and neighbor. So the will is outward focused. Justice is outward focused. It's about how do I relate rightly to the other person, God or the state or my mom, or my teacher, or my student, or any other person, okay, falls into the realm of justice. How I relate to them with my will. So justice is the constant and firm will to give the other what I owe to them. The way that I have it written up there is a little clumsy, I'm sorry. It's the constant and firm will to give the other what is due to them, what is owed to them, what they have a right to. Make sense? The other. It's other focused. Justice. You got all this, Cody?
Yep.
Okay. So justice toward men disposes one to respect the rights of each and to establish in human relationships the harmony that promotes equity with regard to persons and to the common good. Here's a hugely important word. Common good. What is a common good?
Good for everyone.
It's a good that's good for everybody and is shared by everybody, at least potentially, without being diminished or limited. So, truth is a common good. God is the supreme common good because everybody can have access to him and he's not diminished in any way. Peace, society that is in peace, is a common good. Everybody benefits from this good of a peaceful society in such a way that it doesn't matter how many people you have, it's not limited. It's shared and shareable by everybody. Okay? It's common to all. Okay? Does that make sense? So, the common good is the basic good proper to society that that leads to the flourishing of the life of all of those involved in the society. So justice enters in here because justice means that you're going to have a rightly ordered society so that the greatest common good can come about, so that everybody can live the best kind of life possible, if you will. Right? That doesn't mean that everybody shares materially in the same things. For example, wealth, material wealth. The common good can be upheld even though not everybody has the same amount of goods to their name. Make the same money in their job, etc. The common good refers to those goods, that kind of good that can be shared by everybody and is not diminished by the sharing. Okay? Does that make sense? The just man is often mentioned in sacred scriptures. It is distinguished by habitual right thinking and the uprightness of his conduct toward his neighbor. In the Old Testament, the just man is basically synonymous with holiness. So in the Old Testament, if you want to be holy, above all, you are just. Okay, now wisdom enters in there, love enters in there. But when you read through the Psalms, when you read through the wisdom literature, when you read through the law and the prophets, the just man is extremely revered as kind of like the icon of holiness. Okay? Now we're going to find that the perfection of justice is in love. And the New Testament, Jesus, helps us to see that the fulfillment of the law is love, which presupposes justice, but goes beyond it. Okay? Because I can be just to people that I don't love. Follow me? It's hard, but it's possible. And interestingly, in order for justice to come about, actually speaking in society, you do need to love your neighbor. Otherwise, sin will distort your relationships with those people in which you'll naturally act unjustly towards them if you don't have charity towards them. The justice system, however, is necessary in a fallen society in order to provide, as far as possible, justice amongst individuals who don't love each other. Make sense? If everybody loved each other perfectly, would we have need for the court system?
No.
No. But we don't all love each other. And often we hate each other. And so, in order to protect the very rights of people, we need the legal system to say, I'm not forcing you to love them, but you got to give them what is due to them. Follow me? Good. Justice. Third one, fortitude or courage. Okay? Is tied to the irascible appetite, which its act is to regulate fear and daring, dealing with the difficult.
Isn't this like hope and desire too?
Yep, hope would fear fit into here.
What does a fortitude do?
Fortitude?
Mm.
It regulates our passions, especially of fear and daring.
Regulates your passion.
Yep, regulates our passions of fear and daring so that we can attain to what is difficult to attain. Okay, so fortitude is the moral virtue that ensures firmness in difficulties and constancy in the pursuit of good. Those two words, firmness and constancy, okay, traditionally in St. Thomas's explanation of fortitude, he says there are two fundamental acts of courage proper to the courageous person. The two acts are attack and endurance. Firmness, okay, you could put in quotation marks above that or in parentheses, attack. That sometimes when you're pursuing that which is good but difficult for you to attain, you need to attack the obstacles that stand between you and getting there. Okay? Similarly, in pursuing what is good for you to attain but is difficult, sometimes you need to endure the pain and the suffering and the attack of the evil, and you just need to weather the storm. Okay? You need to, for example, you need to suffer the temptation and let it pass in our spiritual life. Sometimes that's all you need to do. You just need to simply hunker down. You're being tempted by something, and you just say, Jesus, I don't want to do this. And you just get in your foxhole with Jesus, and you just let the devil beat on you for a little bit, and you say, okay, I don't want to do this. I'm just holding on to you. Just enduring it, right? And then you just offer that to the Lord, and then it passes, right? So endurance and attack. Endurance and attack. Those are the two fundamental acts of courage, of fortitude. Okay? What does fortitude do? It strengthens the resolve to resist temptations and to overcome obstacles. So there's those two words again in a different format. Resist and overcome. Resist, endure. Overcome, attack. Obstacles in the moral life. The virtue of fortitude enables one to conquer fear, even fear of death, and to face trials and persecutions. It disposes one even to renounce and sacrifice his life in defense of a just cause. The Lord is my strength and my song, says the Psalms. In the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world, says Jesus. Right? So he's trying to strengthen his disciples in faith and in courage by saying, you're going to have troubles in the world. If you follow me, it's not a prosperity gospel. Once you give your life to Jesus, once you're baptized, doesn't mean your problems stop. In fact, the truth is, once you begin to follow Jesus in an intentional way, you can trust that the devil's going to throw all sorts of things at you to try to derail you, right? Right? Our Lord says, wide and broad is the way that leads to perdition, and many are those who enter upon it. He says, straight and narrow is the path that leads to eternal life, and few are those who find it. So once you find that straight and narrow way that's going to lead you to eternal life, the devil who hates you with a hatred that we can't really even imagine, okay, wants to get you off of that path, right? Whereas if you're strolling down the street, leisurely taking your time on your way to hell, is he going to get in your way?
No.
He has no reason to get in your way. Things go great on a kind of spiritual level when it comes to temptations when you're not following God. Because the devil's like, I don't need to get in the way of this guy. He's going where I want him to go, right? I'm just going to continue to tempt him with the things that he's following, like a carrot. Just follow the carrot, follow the carrot. Oh, there you go, right down into hell. Whereas, and then Jesus, when we're, Jesus then when we're on that way, right, then he bites our conscience. He acts in a way that bites our conscience, who he reminds us of the pain of choosing against God, which we all know that pain of the conscience, right? Whereas, on the other hand, when we're following God actively, right, God strengthens us interiorly and offers us the gift of his consolation and his peace in order to draw us on towards himself. And when we're doing that, then the devil starts throwing all sorts of external stumbling blocks, temptations, doubts, frustrations, temptation to discouragement. You're praying and all of a sudden you've got these wild imaginative fantasies being thrown at you when you're trying to pray, or you're distracted, you're thinking about supper. All you can think about is eating while you're trying to pray, right? Like, this is how the devil works on us when we're actively trying to follow God. So we need courage in order to resist, right? To endure the temptation and to overcome it, to attack through a way that uses spiritual combat. Like my spiritual director says, these battering ram prayers. So you got to use these battering ram prayers when the devil tempts you. Simple prayers like, Jesus, I trust in you. Over and over and over again. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. And then if every time the devil begins to tempt you, you turn to Jesus, is that productive for him? No, so then he'll have to figure out a new tactic, because he can't tempt you outright, right? So there's all sorts of, it's funny. It's just a funny game. Anyway, does that make sense? I think that's helpful to know about temptations and why we need courage to overcome them, and to know that you're being tempted. Sometimes we wander through life and we're being tempted and we don't even realize we're being tempted, right? For me, especially working in the school, I'm starting to realize the biggest temptation and stumbling block that the devil wants to put in my way is very often discouragement. Nobody listens to what you say. Nobody's affected by, that was a stupid homily. If you would have just been a good preacher, then they would have been converted, right? They would have received, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, crap, I'm doing a horrible job, right? But that's discouragement. And you take a step back from that and you're like, well, what the heck's going on here? And you realize, no, that's not true. That's not what's going on. And you're like, okay, I'm on to you. And so every time that discouragement begins to enter in, then you're like, that's stupid. Going forward, right? So, it's important to recognize how the devil works on us, huh? Or maybe I'm the only one who's tempted, I don't know. Now, this is a very important part of courage. Here's a question for you. 10,000 imaginary dollars. And you can phone a friend. Do angels have courage?
No.
Why not?
I don't know, I just know that.
They have
They're not
no soul,
tempted.
they
Yes,
can't
they
choose
have a
freedom.
soul.
Wait.
That's a good question. Come on.
Um,
Do angels have courage? Read through this again. I'll give you 5 minutes. Read through this, and I want you to formulate your answer, and then we're going to go around and talk about it, okay? The beginning of the answer is on that screen. Just wait. Wait.
Let's see, yes.
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 I say no.
No.
No,
And I
because
know why.
Yes.
they don't have
No.
one. I say yes.
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 No,
No.
not once you're
Yes, they do.
Yep.
Because the fallen angels went to
At that
hell.
Yeah, but
And
at
they're the ones
that
that have
time, but
courage to
now
stand up
they,
against
Good
them.
angels have
Yeah.
fortitude.
You
and
have
that's
fortitude to stand up for God when Lucifer
Okay, wait.
returned.
when? Are you saying
In general, it doesn't matter if it's before or after the fall.
Yes.
what-
Because
Fortitude
courage-
and all that.
Because whether or not they have courage is proper to their nature, not to any particular state of before or after. So think about what an angel is, and then ask yourself the question, can they have courage? So Rogers, I want to know your opinion on this too. This is a speculative question.
I was thinking it.
I just don't have
Yeah. Brandon, what do you think? You got that answer formulated?
I don't, but they don't have foundations. Can I ask you, Jane?
Why do you hate them?
Do angels even experience fear?
Okay. I want to see a show of hands, first and foremost.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. Get off the fence. What do you think is the more probable answer? And then go that way, okay? Those of you who say yes, angels have courage or are capable of courage, raise your hand.
Exactly.
What?
16. You got about, I'm getting like 16 or so.
I don't know.
How many of you say no, that angels are not capable of courage? One.
I think they're capable. No, I think they're capable.
Can
No, I
You
want.
didn't vote yes.
I'm thinking.
You don't have any more time to think.
Kinda,
What's your
you're
punch?
thinking no until everyone else says
What's
it.
your-
Yeah, I say no,
but I don't
I
want
say
to
no.
to get mad at me.
Mr. Rogers, where do you come in?
I went with yes.
Okay, the answer is no.
Yes.
And this is why. Angels are immortal.
They don't have
They
a
don't
moral.
have
They don't
fear of
have a moral.
death.
They're incapable of suffering death. And courage is directly tied to my mortality. That I suffer the possibility of dying, of being wounded. I'm vulnerable to evil. Okay, to be vulnerable is to be woundable. Vulnus comes from the Latin word wound. Okay, so this is what's so I think interesting and insightful about the virtue of courage is that every time you express or exercise the virtue of courage, you're doing so in the face of your own mortality. So what's the two supreme examples of the courageous person? One's secular, one's religious.
Die for your faith.
The martyr, okay, on a secular level, who is it that we look to as the most courageous of all people? Hmm? Well, I didn't hear you. Soldiers. Soldiers. Why? Because they are willing to die for a greater good. Okay? So, Joseph Pieper, building on St. Thomas Aquinas, reminds us that every act of courage is a recognition of our vulnerability. If you're invulnerable to suffering, and every time we suffer in our bodies, it's a reminder of our mortality. Even the most mild illness, coughing, if I have a cough, right, in which I'm sick, that is a trajectory towards death. Sickness means you aren't immortal, even if it's a mild sickness. So every act of courage is based upon the recognition that I am mortal, that I'm capable of suffering, and because I'm capable of suffering, I'm capable of dying. Yep.
Okay, but when the angel or when they have like the choice to go follow,
Mm-hmm.
continue to follow God or follow the devil. Like, I don't, wouldn't that be?
They didn't. Now remember this. Where is courage placed? The irascible appetite. Where is the irascible appetite
Bless
found?
you.
In our spiritual soul or in our body? In our body. It's an emotion. They don't have bodies. They're not capable of dying. They have no possibility of the emotion or the emotional act of courage. It's interesting.
Oh.
Super interesting.
So then what did they make them choose?
Intellect and will. Their choice against God or for God was not moved by passion. It was purely intellectual. We're led into sin very often by passions. Lust, for example. Oh, she's so beautiful, I just fell into lust. Or he's so beautiful, I just fell into lust, right? I'm moved there by a disordered appetite that is bodily. When an angel sins, it's purely intellectual. Purely intellectual.
But
which is why they're way more responsible for their sins than we are.
okay, but they can't sin now.
Not now. So the angels can't sin, the demon, but as you're saying before,
Yeah.
their test,
Mhm.
right? They didn't need courage. It was a perfectly intellectual calculation on their
What
part.
do you mean by that? I don't get how to be intellectual.
They made a choice, and the choice was not influenced by a feeling or an emotion, if you will, or fear. They had no fear in a bodily, emotive kind of sense or anything like that. So it was purely spiritual, purely intellectual, their choice. Whereas our choices are bodily and spiritual together. We're moved by our bodies and our passions, or we hopefully move them and they help us to experience or to carry out what's good, right? So if I have great courage, it helps me in my body to do what I need to do in order to overcome the obstacles of my own perfection, which would be suffering and death, right? As a kind of obstacle to choosing what's true and good. Okay, so we spent enough time on that. Temperance. Temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasure and provides balance in the use of created goods. Okay? It moderates the attraction of pleasures. So how strong?
Is that desirable?
Yep. How strong is the emotion that moves me with regard to something that's desirable? How strong is my attraction to food, to drink, to sex, to driving fast sports cars, to adrenaline? Okay? Ultimately, temperance is needed because there are so many good things in the world that if I don't moderate my sensible attraction to them, my emotional attraction to them, they're going to draw me away from that which is objectively better, but less sensually desirable, namely God or virtue, right? Or true love. What does true love look like? Looks like the cross, right? If I'm so attracted to pleasure, that I can't even imagine avoiding pleasure or foregoing pleasure for the sake of a greater good, then I'll never choose that greater good. Because I'm surrounded by all sorts of things that are delightful to my desires. Right? If I don't understand and have a real control over my sensual attraction to food, I'll never fast. Even if I know that the fasting is good for me, I'll never do it because my emotive response to the good of food is so strong that it pulls me there, if you will. Does that make sense? Or not really?
Yeah.
Think of attraction as like a rubber band. It connects you in an intentional way. If I'm attracted to something, I'm connected to that thing emotionally. Right? This is why Father Joe, his story last night about the breakup. He had an emotional attachment to her that was at such a deep level and that was so strong that when you cut that off, right, it hurts horribly. There was no detachment there. There was no indifference towards his girlfriend as a good that is desirable to him.
Father.
Yep.
What do I write for, like, you know how prudence is like things to be done?
Yep.
What would I write for temperance?
Things to be, things are, it's about things that are desirable. Things that are desirable. The desirable. The difficult. Okay? Instant gratification. Why do you need temperance? Because instant gratification will never allow you to achieve great goods. A life of instant gratification where I'm just constantly seeking to gratify myself in an instantaneous way will never allow me to do anything great. Because I'll only be able to do what is immediately pleasurable to me. And all the things that are really great in life require me to be able to say, no, I'm sacrificing this for the greater good. Right? There's not a single thing in our lives that is great, right, that doesn't require temperance in order to achieve it. Even in marriage. Even when it comes to conjugal relations with your husband or wife. It's built into the very nature of human love that you must be willing to forego it in certain circumstances and situations for the greater good, which might even include conjugal life.
What's conjugal life?
Life of intercourse with your husband or wife. The joining of yourselves together. Okay? What would be a conjugate or a conjunction, right? Something that joins things together. Okay? Humility. Humility is not a cardinal virtue. However, it is one of the most important Christian virtues. Because humility restrains us from going after things too great for us, and it does this by moderating the sense we have of our own worth. Okay, pride is it snowing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
School's out at noon. School's out at noon.
Snow day!
That means the roads are frozen.
It's funny because you think we're joking.
It does this by moderating the sense we have of our own worth. Okay? Humility, okay, we're naturally inclined by our concupiscence, by the sin of pride, which Adam and Eve committed in the garden and has been passed on to us, to think we're so dang great that we can live without God. What is pride ultimately? I don't need God at every moment in my life. I'm doing just fine by myself. Okay? Which is totally false and wrong. We don't understand ourselves. It's not living in the truth. This is a wonderful quote to put somewhere where you're going to see it all the time. Humility is a virtue whereby man, through a true knowledge of himself, becomes despicable in his own eyes. Now, I'm not saying that you should hate yourself, but you should understand. You should understand what it means to be a sinner. That's just simply truth.
What does it mean to be a sinner?
It means to be the kind of creature who has rejected his greatest good out of love for himself. It means to be fallible in yourself, that you're not infallible. It means to be a kind of being that needs God. That's what it means to be a sinner. I'm the kind of being that needs God in every moment of my life. So the humble man we see in the gospel is the one whom God exalts because they're open to receiving the gift and the grace of God's life, his grace. The humble are those who are capable of being great. How did Mary crush the head of the serpent, the devil? Through her humility. No, she didn't have strong feet. She had humility. Okay? It's the humility that makes the Christian, it's the humility that is the foundation for the greatness of the Christian. Because once you're humble, God can be everything for you. For the proud person, God can't do anything because he's not going to violate your freedom. Whereas the humble person says, God, you need to be everything for me. Because I'm incapable of doing it on my own. You've created me, you're everything. And so God can then fill you with how much of himself? Everything.
John Legend said.
Really? John Legend?
Oh, no. Never mind.
Right? That was what's the song?
All me.
All of me. All of you. All of me. Right? Yeah, that's like kind of about this. Right?
Yeah.
It's about the sharing of the entirety of God's self with us so that we become full of God. Right? You want to be truly great as an athlete? Become humble. So that God's greatness can be great in you. You want to be truly great in anything? Become humble so that God can be the one who gives his goodness, his power, his wisdom to you. Follow me? Whatever there is in us of good comes from God. This is absolutely true. There's not a single thing that is good in us that has not been given to us by God. Whatever there is of evil comes from ourselves. Absolutely true. Whatever there is of evil in us comes from me. Whatever there is of good in me comes from God. Right? So when we see our own gifts, we recognize God as their author. And when we see how much we sin and are inclined to sin, we should seek to be reckoned as nothing. So when I consider myself under the aspect of a sinner, I recognize that of myself, I'm nothing but evil. But, insomuch as I am a creature of God, I'm created good and I'm created for the greatness that God has desired to give me as a gift. Right? Whatever there is good in me, that's from God. Whatever there is evil in me, that comes from myself. Beautiful.